After spending 10 days in Entebbe, I travelled to Fort Portal and then on to my final destination, Lake Nkuruba, a short distance away. Here, the local community has set up an ecotourism project beside the lake, which lies inside an extinct volcanic crater. By staying here, you help fund community projects, such as building and running the local school. This is the hut where I spent 16 days, and what follows is a day-by-day video account of the wildlife that I found around the lake. The lake itself is quite small, and the steep sides plunge straight into deep water. Around the lake, the villagers have preserved an area of forest, most of which in this area has been destroyed long ago. They have also used native trees to replant an area of former forest. This must be the best place in Africa to see and film the great blue turco. Sometimes you can see as many as 8 in a single tree. Although I was there in the height of the dry season, it had been much more rainy than normal, and I was very lucky because there were far more butterflies than there should have been. This is a male blue spot pansy, and this, surprisingly enough, is a quite different looking female. And an even more freshly emerged male. In the darker parts of the forest, the light-banded Judy was common. This is one of those few butterflies that has a false head at its rear end. In this picture, the true head is on the right, the false head on the left. When the butterfly lands, it does an about turn in order to confuse any bird into thinking that the false head is the real head. Sunlit spots along the edges of the paths were preferred by the legionnaires. This is Penelope's legionnaire, and this is the Alciope legionnaire. There are 4 different kinds of monkeys at Lake Nkuruba, and the most prominent of these, and also the tamest, is the eastern black and white colobus, or goresa. Their diet consists mainly of leaves. In the evening they would sometimes move down to the ground and play on the campsite. Sometimes a wildlife photographer just gets lucky. After rushing away through the canopy, this red-legged sun squirrel suddenly came back towards me and for no obvious reason started feeding in full view. This was on my 3rd day, and I never saw it again. The path from the campsite down to Lake Nkuruba passes close to this cliff, and it's here that the monkeys and the great blue turcos come to eat the rock. The leaves that they eat are very deficient in minerals, so the monkeys need to supplement their diet, and they do this by nibbling away the minerals on the cliff face. These minerals are essential for the health of the monkeys, as they are for most other mammals. When I was walking down the path towards the lake, I often had to pause a while to allow the young gorasas to finish playing. They seem to prefer the paths, which were nice and flat. As in most of Africa, there is a confusing variety of black and white butterflies. This is the friar, an unpalatable and poisonous species, which cannot be eaten safely by any animal. It's mimicked by a variety of other harmless butterflies, such as this mimetic swallowtail. On most days I would see at least one or two new butterflies basking by the path. This is the familiar legionnaire, and this is a pearl gladiator. The black-patched swallowtail is another false head mimic. The real head on the right is very inconspicuous. The false head on the left has pseudo-antennae, which are constantly ruffled by the breeze in a lifelike manner. Down near the lake, there was a small area where a civet regularly came to deposit its droppings. As in all of Africa, animal dung, especially that of predators, is a great attraction for various butterflies. This green-veined gladiator was so preoccupied, probing the dung with its proboscis, and so beautifully camouflaged, that I almost stepped on it. This black patch hair streak even opened its wings while feeding on the dung, something I've never seen one do before. A small tree near my house was covered in tiny green fruits, and these attracted about 7 or 8 different kinds of birds daily. Among these were these lovely African green pigeons. Another bird that could be relied on to come for its share of the fruits every day was the greater blue-eared starling. The tiny African firefinch, this is a male, is common in gardens. Like all monkeys, vervets are highly social and spend a lot of time grooming one another. On this shot, the sound of the great blue turco calling in the tree above me is an added bonus. The least confiding of the 4 species of monkeys at Lake Nkuruba was the red-tail. These are shot on a 600mm lens and were all I managed to get. All around the campsite, little bee-eaters were constantly hawking for insects. The great blue turcos were an almost constant wonderful presence. They could be amazingly tame. This one came and landed in the tree directly above me, just a few metres away, and sat there looking at me. This one is feeding on soil directly next to my house. Less often seen, and also less tame, was Ross's turco. Every day I would spend about an hour or so down by the lake. This yellow-billed duck was having a tough time coping with a really slippery fig fruit that had fallen into the water. The slowly rotting fruits had also attracted these tiny fish which were nibbling at them. Close to the duck, this African map butterfly was drinking on the lake shore. Over the previous few days, I'd seen Goraces taking an interest in stones, picking them up, examining them, then dropping them. I was puzzled about this, then finally found out why. They nibble at them, just as they do the rock face. One morning, walking down to the lake, I was preceded by a blue diadem male in fluttering courtship around a female. Now the question now was, would they land, and if so, would it be somewhere where I could film them? The answer was yes. They landed right by the path in a most perfect position. The smaller one on the left is the male. He's fluttering his wings hopefully, and suddenly a second male arrived, and things started to get more complicated. The new arrival was fluttering his wings more vigorously than the original male, and then he began to join in the action. In the end, both blue diadem suitors were unsuccessful and the female flew away. Butterfly courtship doesn't always have such a fruitless outcome, as seen in this mating pair of false diadems. As more usually happens though, this male variable egg fly, hovering over the female and showering her with love dust from his wings, is wasting his time. Even when a second male shows up, she's more interested in food than sex. The Goraces seemed to spend less time grooming than the other monkeys, and it wasn't until day 9 that I finally managed to film them to good quality. That's the sound of a Goracer calling, which sometimes woke me up in the early morning. And then I spotted something interesting. The female moving from the right is carrying something white beneath her. It proved to be a newly born pure white baby. All the other females turned out to be absolutely fascinated by this baby and were desperate to hold it. They would make strenuous attempts to wrest it from its mother's arms, while she equally strenuously resisted. Sometimes she relented and did allow the baby to be borrowed. Some days I didn't manage to film much new, such as this flame tree or this lady's May butterfly. This vervet eating the cliff face came as something of a surprise, because the locals had told me that they weren't interested. The Goracer baby continued to be an object of great desire. This juvenile jumped onto the mother's back in an attempt to grab the baby. As the baby grew, it began to take an interest in what its mother was eating. It also became more adventurous and started to explore its immediate surroundings. At this stage it's still pure white, but as it grows it will gradually start to assume the adult colours. Even now I was still seeing 1 or 2 new butterflies a day. This is a small smoky legionnaire. Although often visiting flowers, this male scarlet-chested sunbird is here looking for spiders and insects. One morning, when walking down to the lake, 3 great blue turacos flew up from the ground in front of me. I stopped dead when I realised that one bird still remained. It was making swallowing movements, and I realised that it had been eating the loose earth at the base of the cliffs. I thought it would fly away, but it just looked at me, and then calmly went back to doing what it had been doing. Eventually it did fly up to perch on a liana nearby. Most days a family party of 5 mongooses would show up at the campsite. Here they're grooming one another. The 4th monkey present at Lake Nkuruba was a Uganda Columbus. I'd been seeing them around, but it wasn't until now I finally got some good footage. The Uganda Columbus used to be regarded simply as a race or subspecies of the very widespread red Columbus, but recent DNA sequencing has shown it to be a separate species, and a rare one at that. As with all monkeys, the babies are extremely playful. It's a typical colobus, its diet consisting mainly of leaves of a huge variety. They seem willing to stuff just about any leaf into their mouths. The fruiting tree near to my hut was still attracting new birds. This is a splendid double-toothed barbet. It was usually a pair, but I only ever managed to film one at a time. Every time I approached the lake, a giant kingfisher would fly away, but it took nearly 2 weeks before I managed to film one. The Goresa baby saga continued to evolve, as I began to realise that baby swapping was so prevalent that I didn't actually know who the real mother was. A couple of days after an unseasonable shower of heavy rain, a few new species of butterflies began to appear, such as this Elias orange forester. The false diadem also turned up. This is a mimic of a number of unpalatable black and white butterflies. These include the friar, shown here in a clip borrowed from my Teddy section. This appears to be the orange form of the small yellow-banded legionnaire. And from a tiny orange butterfly, we move to a huge blue one, larger than the palm of your hand. This is the eastern blue beauty. After nearly 2 weeks of watching the Goraces eating leaves, it suddenly turned out that they also ate flowers with great gusto. Although they often seem to be quite fearless jumpers, monkeys often have a bit of a think about it first. After spending 8 or so hours a day walking in the forest looking for subjects, I was looking forward to my dinner. This is vegetable stew with the most delicious chapatis I've ever eaten. I'm in the campground at Lake Nkuruba, and for the black and white colobus monkeys, it's playtime. One evening, a huge group of Uganda Columbus, 300 or so animals, moved through the nearby forest.
Its tail once, its tail was hanging down, and I just touched the hair bit and it knew and it jumped.
What surprised me here was to see Uganda Columbus grooming a red-tailed monkey. At meal times, we had to take great care not to leave our food unattended, otherwise the ever-present vervets would grab it. This female has stolen a bowl of soup. When the dominant male showed up, I thought he would take the food from her, but he was quite content to let her go on feeding. While the adults were spending their time trying to steal our food, the babies just went on doing what baby monkeys love doing. They played. The arrival of a toad in camp caused consternation among the youngsters. They weren't quite sure what to do and what to make of it. Even after 15 days, I was still seeing new butterflies. This is a Uganda legionnaire, and this is the Pied Piper. At around 14 days old, the baby Goresa is getting much bolder. It's beginning to move away from its mother and experimenting in eating leaves. It's still the only baby in the group, but it's still being swapped from female to female. On the ground, the rather soft, moist Goresa dung is formed into balls by these scarab beetles. They roll the ball away to some secure site where they can bury it. The dung beetle larva then develops on the dung. The greatest threat to the beetle grub, invisible below the ground in its nest, is the ever-present mongooses. They spend all day digging in the ground looking for beetle larvae and other tasty morsels. And so, after 16 days, I had to tear myself away from Lake Nkuruba and my hut and head to my next destination. This was Katunguru, a small village within Queen Elizabeth National Park.